She chose Patricia Polacco because she is dedicated to discussing tough issues in her books through telling authentic stories that incorporate social issues. Most of her stories, whether lighthearted or dense, stem from family experiences, oral traditions, or encountered events. She has a large body of work that includes many autobiographical stories, making her a great author to study for multiple purposes, including writing style, inspiration, and memoir.
Patricia was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1944 and lived in Union City until 1949 when she moved to Oakland, California. Her parents were divorced when she was 3 years old, and from then on she spent the school year with her mother and the summers with her father. Her grandparents on both sides were very important to her growing up and influenced a lot of her personality. She moved to Oakland, California at age 8 and spent most of her life there. It was in California that she realized, with the help of Mr. Falker, that she had a learning disability. She didn't learn to read until she was 14 years old. She went on to earn her PhD in art history, after which she had 2 children, Stephen and Tracy. She didn't begin writing until the age of 41 and has since written 49 children's books. She now lives in Union City, Michigan at Meteor Ridge Farm after 37 years in California. She enjoys opening her home to friends in the community as well as raising her 2 cats, goat, pygmy goat, and lamb.
And I didn't realize that not every child has the glory of growing up in a neighborhood where people are different than they are. And they don't have the glory of understanding why other people do what they do and say different prayers and eat different food and perhaps even dress differently or look differently. So I think that's another thing literature, especially multicultural literature does, is it gives them an understanding that they otherwise are not going to have. They're not going to hear it in their own homes. So if they can read authentic stories and understand that the heart of humanity is the same, doesn't matter how we're packaged on the outside, we're all the same. I think that does a great service to molding a child to be a citizen of the world.
Patricia's stories are mostly narratives told from the viewpoint of the main character, usually herself, who are mostly children or young adults. The books incorporate dialogue authentic to the story that is written to be accessible to young readers. Most of her stories are written for older elementary grades, either through their topics or language. Here she tells about her inspiration for writing from her family.
I would have to say all of my books are probably based on family stories, but remember, I was raised in a household where the old members of my family lived with us. And there was something wonderful about sitting at their knee and listening to how things were.
Most of her illustrations are done in pencil and watercolor. There are also actual family photographs incorporated into a few of her books. Throughout the literature, there is a recurring pattern that is used to emphasize one aspect of the illustration as it relates to the story. Here, Patricia tells about her illustrations from one of her works.
Ended up in this quilt. So sometimes I will do it for a reason. In Betty Doll, the entire book was in black and white except for the doll. So, I guess I use it as a technique to kind of say to a child, this is the focus, but here's the story around it.
Mr. Lincoln's Way deals with racism and bullying by a student with the nickname Mean Gene. It also incorporates the ideas of friendship with students and with adults. This story can be connected to the curriculum through the study of birds, which is prominent in the book. In this segment, Patricia gives a book talk for the story and discusses her reasoning for writing the story, Mr. Lincoln's Way.
I thought, I would like to write a story where the issue of the color of someone's skin is truly an issue. And in Mr. Lincoln's Way, that's the issue. It wasn't the child's issue. Well, it was secondhand. He was bringing his parents' point of view into that school. So they had to find something that was common between them. And Mr. Lincoln, the black principal, this is a white child, black principal. And the child, it's implied in the story, but he comes from a white supremacist family. That's his point of view. And he really loves this principal, but he does not dare have any interaction with him. So what they find that is common between them is their love of birds, and it happens their school has this atrium that's empty because they apparently didn't have the right, bushes and things to attract a population of birds. So that's what they work on together. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't matter how different we are, there is something we can find that we have in common, and that should be the place that we start from, is understanding our commonality, and then from there celebrating our difference instead of having difference be a cause for a feeling of isolation.
The Lemonade Club is about two young girls who go through a traumatic journey together, but with the help of their teacher, learn to turn lemons into lemonade. Marilyn and Tracy are best friends. One day, while they're playing together, Marilyn collapses, and after visiting the doctor, is diagnosed with leukemia. The two girls are devastated, but with their teacher, Mrs. Weichelman's help, both the girls cope with their sadness. When Marilyn gets back to school, she discovers that her entire class has shaved their heads in support. Eventually, the girls realize that Mrs. Weichelman's hair doesn't grow back and discover that she too has cancer. The girls all become close through their troubles and eventually accompany their teacher to her wedding. There are many important themes in this book, including friendship, cancer, bullying and teasing, helping others, and overcoming obstacles. A few curriculum options could be the medical field and treatments and diseases. This is a true story about Patricia's journey as a new student who is placed into the special education classroom and how she overcomes the challenges faced that year. Patricia starts her new school in California and is placed into a class that the other students call the junkyard. She is teased and bullied along with the other students of the class who confide in their teacher about feeling like junk. Her teacher puts the children into groups and takes them to a junkyard down the road for a lesson on what junk really is by making something new out of what they find. Patricia's group decides to rebuild an airplane, and they're going to take this baby to the moon. Sadly, one of the group members dies while they are working on the project, but the group pushes on to fix it in his honor. They fundraise to buy the engine necessary to make the plane fly, and eventually, after a few setbacks, the group finally launches the plane at the science fair in front of the entire school. The real beauty in this book lies in the author's note at the end, where the reader discovers that not only is this a true story, but there's a happy ending. Patricia runs into one of her old group mates from the book, who tells her that he ended up working for NASA. He also tells her that he took a picture from the day they flew the plane and put it on an Apollo mission, revealing that they actually did go to the moon. This book incorporates a few important themes such as special education, differences, bullying, perception of others, and death of a friend. Also, there are connections to science and art through the airplane and creations made from junk.
My Old Man is a personal narrative told from young Patricia about the summer that her father, a traveling salesman, discovers an ancient rock with mysterious lines on it that he thinks is magical. This heartfelt story describes a household and family that many readers will identify with. Patricia and her brother spends the summers with their father because their parents were recently divorced. Readers see real emotions that many children experience during a divorce process through Patricia's brother Richie, who is always gloomy. When her father loses his job as a traveling salesman, money becomes tight for the family, and her father even has to sell his beloved car. Although times are difficult, Patricia's dad brings a new hope to the family when he shows Patricia and Richie the magical rock. This rock brings a new happiness and encouragement for Patricia's brother, and he believes that the magic of the rock will bring a job for his unemployed father. Her storytelling father decides to submit to a local radio station the story of the rock and the newfound hope that it brought his family. And the radio station offers him a position telling these encouraging stories to listeners. The family returns back to the rock after receiving the good news, only to discover that the rock is no longer there. At first disappointed, Patricia realizes that the hope and magic had been inside of them the whole time. This uplifting story of a family provides a mirror for so many readers with its themes that many children live every day, such as unemployed parents and divorce. This book should be included in every classroom library for children to read, as it provides both a mirror and a window.
Pink and Say is a story passed down from generation to generation in Patricia's family that she retells to the best of her ability. Sheldon, or Say, is injured in the Civil War and is rescued by Pincus, or Pink. Pink and Say become fast friends as Say is cared for by Pincus and his mother in her home at a plantation that has been abandoned. Pink promises Say that he will teach him how to read, and teaches him about his life as a slave. They share stories about their differences growing up, and Say admits that he is scared to go back to war. Pink tells Say that he is proud to fight because it is his fight to fight. Say tells Pink that he is proud of something too. He once shook President Lincoln's hand before battle and lets Pink shake the hand that shook Mr. Lincoln's hand. One day, Pink and Say hear Confederate soldiers near the cabin, and Pink's mom rushes them into the cellar to hide. They hear a commotion outside and a single shot. Once the coast is cleared, they rush out to find what had happened, only to discover that Pink's mom was killed by the Confederate soldiers. Pink and Say decide to leave the cabin and search for the Union Army to rejoin the war, but are soon discovered by Confederate troops and captured. They are then brought to a base and separated, never to see each other again. In the end, the reader is told that Say made it through prison, and that Say is actually the great-great-grandpa of Patricia. They tell the story to remember Pink, whose mother was killed and who has no surviving family to tell his story.
The Butterfly is a story about a young girl who is growing up in France during the Nazi invasion. She becomes friends with a young Jewish girl and helps her family escape to freedom. Monique is a young girl who discovers a ghost in her room one night. When she tells her mother about what she had seen, her mother gets angry and tells her never to speak of it again. One night, she discovers that the ghost is actually Servine, a young girl whose family is living in the basement. Servine is a Jew who is hiding in fear of persecution from the Nazis. Monique and Servine become fast friends and spend many nights playing together in her room. One night, they are seen by a neighbor and Servine and her family must leave the country. Monique and her mother put all the documents together to help them escape the next morning. Monique and her mother head to the train station to help Servine and her family escape. But in the crowds of the train station, Monique gets separated from her mother and must find her own way home. Eventually, she makes it safely home and is comforted by seeing butterflies in the garden, which lets her know that Servine and her family made it safely out of the country.